Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour. We are NAAP, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, Board President, and your host for the evening, and along with Jennifer Falsing, Board Member and Vice President, and Beth Story, Treasurer, and also on the executive team. So we're happy to see so many of you this evening and some new faces. So we hope you'll enjoy this happy hour tonight. We've got a few housekeeping items and some announcements before we start.
Yeah, Beth, we want to go ahead and talk about the summit that we're doing with Right to Know real quick. And I'll drop the link to it in the chat.
I wonder if I opened the wrong picture. Well, anyhow, the summit that we are hosting with Right to Know called Untangling Our Roots, March 31st through March 30th through April 1st of next year. And we are very excited about this, and tickets are on sale. Untangling Our Roots is the website, and Jennifer will probably put that in the chat. First 100 tickets are $279, and there are still a few of those left. So you will want to go to the website, you will want to register, and also while you were there, you will want to take note of how awesome the website is. We just got word this afternoon that our website won an award. So we are pretty excited about that, and we'll probably be posting more information about that, but we think that that's pretty cool that our website won this award. Anyhow, it's going to be a fabulous event, bringing together the adoption, assisted conception, and NPE communities for the first time ever. So check out the site, and while you are there, be sure to grab one of those first 100 tickets.
Thanks, Beth.
And we'll do the other program stuff at the end. If you're ready to get started, I'll bring up the
disclosure.
Yep.
We just want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential, and portions of the event are recorded and may be shared on our private Happy Hour group Facebook page. After tonight, that will be uploaded for replay. So you'll want to follow us on Facebook at the Adoption Happy Hour private page. During the presentation, please remain on mute. You're welcome to use the chat bar and ask questions or share comments of support. And we also have a note about if you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, to please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Okay. That's all we have right now, Jen, until the end?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Okay, at this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Cathryn Vogeley. She is a retired nurse who began writing late in life and discovered that her story won it out. She has raised 2 daughters, is Nana to 5 grandchildren, mother to 3 terriers, and lives with her husband outside of Portland, Oregon. She has a relinquished daughter that was born in 1969, and however, she has chosen not to meet. So she's going to be talking about her story this evening, her journey, and her book, I Need to Tell You, that's out right now. So let's welcome Cathryn.
Thank you. Thank you
How
so
are
much. It's my privilege and honor to be here. I've only been to a few meetings. I've only discovered groups like this one and Cub since I published my book. I'm pretty amazed and a little bit embarrassed, I guess, that I have been so much in the dark about adoption. My way of coping most of my life has been to keep it a secret and not talk about it. And so, I had no idea that I knew my experience. I knew there were a lot of women like me who gave up babies through coercion. I now know. I didn't know back then that it was coercion. And I did not understand or know, I was ignorant of the experience of an adoptee. I was raised in a family where there were too many children and a Catholic family. I had an older sister, 18 months older than me, who was colicky. And then I had a brother 3 years older than me. So I could just hardly imagine how my mother must have reacted when she discovered she was pregnant with me. Another child, so she had 3 babies in 3 years, and one being colicky. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. My father was an accountant for a small family-run company. My father was quite, I would say, an extreme introvert. He didn't like noise. He didn't like commotion. And I don't think either of my parents liked kids. And they ended up with 5. My older brother and sister and I were, and I also didn't know this until late in life, that we were abused. I didn't know that when your father comes running into the living room while you're laying on the floor watching the Lone Ranger, he comes running in after work and he kicks you and he starts shouting at you, "Get up, help your mother, what's the matter with you?" And other occasions like that, in which I would be terrified. I never knew what set him off or what I was doing wrong. And so I grew up with a real anxious self and a very low self-esteem. Back then in the 50s, parents there was no such thing as unconditional love. At least it was never articulated. I think the thinking back then was that if you are too loving with children, that they either won't survive or that they'll be spoiled. And I think spoiled was the greatest one. So I never heard "I love you." There were very few hugs. And I think the only hugs I got, well, I know the only hugs I got from my father were when I hugged him. And I can still remember he would come home from work when he wasn't raging, and I would wrap my hands around his knees. So pretty small, you know. I remember that. And, you know, he would punch the wall, punch a hole in the wall, stuff like that. So I think he had a lot of frustration and anger. I think my parents were good people. I think that they just didn't have the tools or the freedom that they needed or the support that they needed to take care of all these kids. So I started out with a low self-esteem, a frightened child, Catholic, always trying to do the right thing, trying to stay out of the way. And so when I was a teenager, I met a boy, and this boy liked me. And man, did I like that. I didn't care if I liked him. I liked that he liked me. I thought that I was fat. I thought that I was ugly. I thought I was too big. I was uncoordinated. My sister could dance like you wouldn't believe, and I was very uncoordinated. She always looked great. I always looked not great. So again, the self-esteem issues. So we were hooked together. He was a year older than me, and we were just, and I think he was a little bit, I don't think he had self-esteem problems, but I think he was also introverted. And I don't think I was introverted. I think I leaned toward that side, but more centered, I guess, than one or the other. Let's see. So we were together for a couple of years. I was always guilty, always crying. There was no birth control pills back then. There were pills, but only married women could get them. It was illegal, if you can believe that, illegal to prescribe, imagine, prescribe birth control pills to single women, because it would encourage, you know, bad behavior running around. So, you know, there I was, and now I wasn't a virgin anymore, and I was just horrified. I went to church every Sunday and just felt like a liar and a sinner, and I was really, really guilty. Then I got pregnant, and I was absolutely devastated and horrified. The worst part being not the baby, but that I would have to tell my mother and she would know what I had done. That was the first barrier that I had to face. And of course she was horrified, and, you know, there was a lot of commotion, a lot of yelling. And so the boyfriend and I told my parents together. It was a pretty, for my controlled parents, it was a pretty big explosion. So there wasn't any punching or anything like that, but my boyfriend and my dad both jumped up. We were in the living room, jumped up and faced each other, and my dad was shaking and he was shouting, and my boyfriend was pretty muscular, and my dad was kind of, you know, he was a desk guy, accountant, so he had, you know, skinny arms and small build. And anyway, so that was interesting. So my mother was very dramatic. She watched soap operas all the time, and I think that was her MO, was she responded with a lot of drama. So fast forward from there to my boyfriend wouldn't get married. He wanted to finish college. My mother went nuts. She threw him out, said, "Don't ever come back here." So then I had to find a place to hide out, and nobody knew. My parents knew, my boyfriend knew, his parents knew, and that was it. And so I left town and I stayed with an ex-chemistry teacher who was in Ohio. I was in Pittsburgh when I was pregnant. So I stayed with her for 6 weeks, and then I came back to Pittsburgh and I stayed at a home for unwed mothers called Rosalia. There were enough of us back then, and this was 1968, sorry. There were enough of us back then that, you know, they had these homes all over the place. And so many of you who are in my age group know that. Yeah, so I went to Rosalia, 20 minutes from home. I was there from November 1st through January 23rd, when the baby was born. I was 3 weeks overdue, and I labored alone for 48 hours. My mother didn't want to see me while I was pregnant, so obviously she didn't come for the labor. And my door was kept closed in the hospital because, you know, it was all about anonymity. So they didn't want nurses coming in and out who might see me and know me and talk about me. So the idea of this was that I would have this baby, give the baby away, and move on with my life as if nothing ever happened. So, you know, that's the message I got every day, and that's what I tried to do. And in Rosalia, the girls talked among themselves, of course, every day. And it was, everybody said, when you have your baby, don't see your baby. Don't hold your baby. Don't feed your baby. If you do, you won't be able to give her up. And there was one girl while I was there who did hold her baby, and she did feed her baby, and she took her baby home. And I was so flabbergasted that after all this, that somebody could choose that, because it was hell for me to go through that alone, all of it. So I was determined that wasn't going to happen to me. And so after I left the hospital, which, you know, it was all secret, I went through the kitchen part of the hospital to be discharged out the back. where the deliveries were made and the trash was and everything. And I got into the cab to go back to Rosalia. And this was just 24 hours after, or less than 24 hours after the baby was born, which she was 9.5 pounds. So, you know, it was a pretty rough birth. And I had all kinds of injuries. I could barely walk. And as I closing the cab door, a nurse came running out from the hospital screaming, "You can't leave yet. You can't leave yet. What are you doing?" And I didn't know what was going on. And I stopped closing the door, and she's screaming at me, "You have to take your baby. You have to take your baby back to Rosalia." And I was like, "I can't take my baby. I can't see her. I can't hold her." And I was frantic. And she said, "What's the matter with you? Of course you have to take your baby. How else is she supposed to get back to Rosalia?" And I said, "I don't know. Can't you bring her?" And she said, "That's ridiculous. Let's get going." So it was January. She says, "Freezing out here. Let's get this baby out of the weather." So she put the baby in my arms and she closed the door and the cab moved on. I think it took about 10 minutes to get from Rosalia back to Mercy Hospital, or sorry, from Mercy Hospital back to Rosalia. So I'm holding her in the cab. And, you know, there are a lot of hormones that are going around your body after birth. Oxytocin is excreted, and it's something that it's a physical signal to your body that nature does so that you will be attached to your child. And the baby too has hormones that are secreted. So anyway, I held her, and as we're going along, I'm thinking, you know, there's nobody there to say, "Uh-oh, she looked at her baby." And I couldn't not look. And so I pulled the blanket down, and there she was, my beautiful baby. There were no cameras, no phones. I couldn't take a picture of her, but I tried as hard as I could to put her image in my mind so I would never forget her. After a couple of days in the hospital, or in Rosalia, I went back home, and my mother was just, she didn't want to talk about anything that happened, anything about Ohio, nothing about Rosalia or the labor or anything. She just wanted me to move on. She never said a word about the baby. I don't think she ever said baby, the word baby. So I tried to do what she suggested, or what she ordered me to do. I tried to forget, and I eventually recovered. I bled for 2 months because my injuries were such that, and I didn't have health care. So not that I can remember. There are certain things in my story that are very sharp in my mind, and there are some that are hazy, and some that just aren't. And so I don't know what I did for pain medicine or prenatal vitamins, you know, before the baby was born. I don't remember that, where I might have gotten them, or if they even did that back then. So as I recovered, I went to a new nursing school, and I was just driven to find a husband and have a baby that I could keep, that would be legitimate, that nobody would take away. And that's what I did. I found a guy that would marry me, and I played the role. Acted however he wanted. So we got married, and we couldn't have been more opposite, just opposite people. So we had 2 beautiful daughters. I had my first daughter with him. So Marilyn was born in 1969, and my second daughter was born in 1972. So a very short time between them. It wasn't until after my second daughter was born and I was sitting with them. This is one of those flashbulb moments that I can't forget, or I won't forget. I can tell you what the chair was like, what color it was, what was happening outside. I remember all of that. And my new baby was 2 months old, and my other girl was 2.5 years old, playing at my feet with some blocks, and it was snowing out, and I think Sesame Street was on, and I just felt this huge, just unbelievably impossible joy for my children and for all the blessings I had. And it suddenly hit me right then that I had another child. I had a child that was every bit as much mine as these two in front of me. And it just grabbed me like, oh my God. And I don't know how that happened, that from the time I gave Mary Lynn up to that day when I had this very strong realization. I don't know how I did that, but at any rate, when that happened and I felt just utterly shocked, I thought, what can I do? It was a closed adoption. It was made crystal clear to me that the records were sealed for 99 years. And I thought, I can never think of her again, because I loved my daughter so much, and I knew that I would love her the same. And I thought, I can never think of her again, or I'll lose my mind. And so that day I made the decision, that's that. I will never think of her again. So I didn't. And I went about my life. I was the best wife I could be. I was the best mother I could be. I loved every minute with my daughters. Just, oh my gosh, I love them so much. And I did fine until they started growing up, and they started, what's called individuating. They didn't need me anymore. They were becoming their own persons, which is normal and it's healthy. And I knew that. I was the one that wasn't healthy. And as I became less important, as kids do, their friends are important. Any other mother in the world is better than me. You know how it goes. And I felt left out. And I started sinking, I guess is what I would say. I had a hysterectomy in 1987, so I was 37 by that time. And I had severe endometriosis. And when the surgeon lifted my ovaries out, he said they just fell apart in his hands. And ovaries normally have a fibrous capsule around them. And mine just disintegrated. And the only thing I can think of was it was because of my emotional distress and how I stuffed it down. And then it was a year or 2 years after that, that I was so depressed. My kids were in school. My husband was a hunter, and I was getting ready for work. I was a nurse. I worked 3 to 11 at that time. And it was like I was in a fog. I just was so depressed. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to never have been. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I just wanted to not be. And I went to the closet and I pulled out the gun case, and I sat down with the gun in my lap. And I had, as a student, I was in an emergency room with when a woman came in who had shot herself in the head. And I remembered this scene. It was like, again, one of those flashbulb moments where, you know, as a student who's never seen anything like that before, it was pretty upsetting. The nurses, everybody was flying around, you know, blood was everywhere. And the nurses kept saying, where's the exit? Where's the exit? And they were looking for the exit wound on her head so they could see what part of her brain the bullet had gone through. But it was bad. It was a very bad scene. And I thought, I can't do that to my daughters. They would come home from school and they would find me, and I cannot do that to them. And so I cried and I put everything away. I never told anybody. And after that, I thought, I have to get a hold of myself here. You know, I'm a mother, I'm a wife. I have responsibilities. There's a lot of people around me that I need to take care of. And so I decided that I was going to go back to school. I had not had college. My nursing program was a diploma program. And I went back to school to a university, and I got a degree, and I loved going to school. I divorced my husband, and by that time my girls were grown. One had graduated college and the other one was in college. Fast forward to 2013, I think it was. I had moved to Oregon, and my husband and I, who I love very much, he's the best partner I've ever had. We had gotten this little egg-shaped camper, and we were going to take it from Oregon down to Moab, to Zion National Park. It was hot, and I went into the trailer. We were packing up. I had a bunch of boxes, and it was hot. The sun was out, and I had these cardboard boxes that were empty, and I was throwing them out on the driveway, and he would bring new ones that were filled. And as he did that, you know, the door would shut, and I didn't want bugs in there. So I shut the door. The door got stuck, and I couldn't get the latch to work. And I pushed the latch, and I pulled it, and I pushed it up, and I pushed it down, and nothing would work. And it was getting hotter and hotter, and the boxes were jabbing me in the legs, and I kind of lost it. I started kicking the door and screaming, and screaming, help, help, I can't get out. And Charlie opened the door, and he said, are you okay? What's wrong? And the door was not locked or anything. I don't know why it wouldn't open, but I'm not a person who panics. That was so unlike me. And I thought, my God, what is the matter with me? And so it kind of went from there forward to maybe 2 years, I guess. And I recognized over that time that I was having these symptoms of PTSD. I couldn't sleep. I was having nightmares. I was drinking too much. I couldn't diet successfully. I've been dieting all my life. I was irritable, jumpy as heck. And so I was a nurse at the VA by that time, and I went to a lecture on PTSD by a PTSD specialist. I always thought PTSD was something military people went through. I didn't know regular people could have it, but in her lecture, it described me perfectly. And I was taken aback, and I thought, what? That sounds like me. So I talked to this woman after the lecture, and we agreed that I could meet with her. And so I did. I started treatment with her. And the first thing I said when I walked in, and I felt horrible. I didn't want to have treatment. I didn't want to be treated. I didn't want to hire somebody or go to somebody that I worked with, although I hadn't ever met her before. The VA is a pretty large system. And I just felt disloyal to my parents, you know, by talking to them or talking about them. But anyway, when I walked in, I was terribly uncomfortable, and I sat down and I said, I really don't know what to talk about. And she said, well, start anywhere. Just tell me about yourself. And I said, well, the first thing I guess you should know that I had a baby when I was 19 and I gave her up for adoption. But that's all in the past. I don't need to talk about that. She said, okay. I said, my father. And then I started talking about my growing up years. And it took a year of crying on that couch. She had gained my trust. I felt like I was making progress. It was so hard going through all that. And I did talk about the pregnancy during that time. Until finally one day she said, maybe it's time to find this person. And this is how defended I still was. I still had this brick wall around me. And I said, this person, like who? She just looked at me. And I said, you mean Gavin, the boyfriend, the father of the baby? And she just shook her head. And I said, you mean the baby? And she nodded. And I just remember feeling like, what the hell? And
Excuse me, I do have to interject right here. Okay, because I think it's really important that we just kind of stop right there and talk about your mindset and how compliant when you surrendered your baby, when you were coerced to surrender your child, the emotions that surrounded that, and how society made you feel, what society expected, what your parents expected. You had this mindset from 1969 that you had continued to carry forward.
Absolutely.
To that moment. And so again, you weren't even thinking about her at that time as she's trying to explain to you that you needed to find her. So I just thought that was important to bring out, that you were a compliant birth mother. And that's where your mindset was at that time.
Yep. And I was still in my head thinking, don't think about her. You know, she has a life. She is, I mean, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But the next thing I said to Rebecca was, well, what if she's dead? And she said, what if she's not? I have no idea why that was the first thing I said. She said, what if she's not? And I said, well, I don't know. Gosh, I have 2 daughters already. I don't know what I would do with another daughter. And I mean, the idea was so foreign to me. I didn't know how to react. But I want to tell you, the trip home was 25 minutes. And by the time I got home, and I didn't remember how I got home, by the time I got home, I knew I would look for her. And from then, that's when I broke open. You know, it was she like a big sledgehammer, as she sat there so quietly and said, maybe it's time to find this person. She helped me break open.
And here's where I think we should show your trailer, because
Okay.
I think it's fitting right now.
Okay.
Pretty powerful trailer. Pretty powerful. Especially that line, I broke down and I broke open. Because I can resonate with that. You need a few minutes?
I'm good. Did you want me to keep going?
You can keep going.
Okay. From that day, I did not stop. It was on my mind 24 hours a day. I started having nightmares. It was the same nightmare. I would be in an airport and I would be running. I was going to be too late. I would run to the gate just as the door was closing. And they wouldn't open the gate. They wouldn't open the door and let me on. And it was the same darn dream every night. And there were different iterations of it, but I don't know how many. I must have had that dream for 2 years or so. The dream doesn't happen anymore, thank God. And the only thing, you know, I looked it up. I looked up airports. I tried to figure it out. I didn't go to a dream specialist, but I think I was afraid that I would be too late and I wouldn't find her. But I did find her, and it was a search agent that I connected with through Catholic Charities, who looked into the records. This was after more than a year of blind alleys, dead ends, paying for records, phoning people, talking to search angels who would always say, you're from Pennsylvania, they have a closed system, you can't get into those records. I talked to the baby's father. He was an attorney by then. He worked in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny Courthouse, where the records were stored. He said, no, you can't get them. And finally, after I searched for a year, I decided I don't have anything, there's nothing else I can do. And so I told Rebecca, my therapist, that I was going to put it out to the universe and let it go. And if I'm meant to find her, I will. And maybe she would find me someday. And that day I felt a lot better when I said that. But then when I went home, I went back into my groove. I kept looking. And it occurred to me one day that there was an email that I had gotten a year before that had information in it from Catholic Charities that included a social worker's name. And I was in therapy with Rebecca at the time, and I said, I don't need a therapist. I have a really good therapist. So I didn't call her. And then, this whole year went by. And that's how I found her. I called this woman. I found my email from a year ago, and I called her, and I gave her all the information, and she said, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure we can get her. We can locate her. And I was just, nobody can imagine those words and how they landed on me, because all I heard for a year was no, 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 no. And all my life I had said to myself, you can't. And then she said, you can. And people in my life were saying, I don't know if you should do this. I don't know if it's a good idea. It could turn out badly. And I would say to people, what could be bad? And, you know, she might reject you. You might not like her. She might not like you, stuff like that. So I was to the point where I didn't care. Everything was, I was just like a speeding engine on a track. You couldn't stop me. And I did think about, well, what if I don't like her? What if she's a drug addict and she ends up on my front step and you know, she doesn't care about me, but she just wants money for her drugs. You know, I made it the worst case scenario. And if that had happened, I don't know what I would have done. But as it came about, the letters were sent to both her and her parents. So she was found, and then it wasn't until 2 weeks later that she responded. And she responded to the search agent. I guess it was a very emotional conversation, and she said that she needed some time. And so it was sometime after that that she sent me, and I think that the search agent sent me her email. I think that the search agent in the beginning was the intermediary, and we used alternative names. We didn't use our real names. I don't know why. And eventually I got a notice from LinkedIn, and I was retired. I didn't use LinkedIn anymore, but I got this notice that somebody had looked at my file on LinkedIn. And I thought, what in the world? So I looked it up, and it was somebody from Atlanta, Georgia. That's where she lives. I thought, oh. So I wrote to this person who was a man, and I said, you know, I wondered if he knew how he knew me and why he looked me up, and etc. And so it turned out that was her husband, and they decided to look me up furtively, I guess. And so that's how I learned her name. And we kept on communicating for, I don't know, maybe a year over email. She didn't want to talk to me. She wouldn't send me pictures. She just wanted to email. And eventually the emails dwindled down to texts, and the texts dwindled down to nothing. And so I wanted to see her so bad. I offered to fly to Atlanta to the airport and have her come to the airport and meet me, and we could maybe have lunch together or something, so that nobody would know. Her parents wouldn't know, her kids wouldn't know. And then I would turn around and fly back to Oregon. And when I made that offer, you know, it'd be pretty expensive. It would be a very long day. I thought, how can she refuse that? What would she have to lose? And she said, no, she couldn't do it. So that's where I'm at.
I'm really sorry that you didn't get that opportunity to meet her. And there's all kinds of questions looming around that I'm sure our audience will be making comments here very shortly about possibly where she's at, what she's been told, you know, and her level of understanding of adoption itself. Would you guys not agree about that? Yeah, wherever she's at. I'm so sorry. So tell us, lead us on though, where from this point that you decided obviously to write a book.
Yeah.
What made you decide to yeah.
I was actually, with Rebecca, when I started to feel better, and I knew I was getting better, I could tell. I'm trying to think. No, I hadn't found Mary Lynn yet, but I was finishing up my treatment. And I had a session where I didn't cry, and that was the first time. And I thought, oh, I am better. And so I knew that we were finishing. And I said, I just have this feeling that I want to write. And I had no intention of writing this story. And I had no idea why I wanted to write or what I would write about. And this woman is a literature professor. And she said, go to the attic. And in Portland, the attic is a writer's institute, which I knew nothing about. I didn't know anything. I knew about the medical community. I didn't know anything about the writing community. So I enrolled in a class taught by Jennifer Lauk. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her. She's published probably 6 books. She was an adoptee. She had a traumatic childhood, and she wrote Blackbird, which was on the New York Times bestseller list. She was on Oprah, etc. So she's a memoirist. I did not go to her for that reason. I went to her because she was teaching the basics of writing, of storytelling. And I was not a writer. I needed to learn how to do this. For what reason? I don't know. I had no goal in mind. I just, it was something to do. And the second class, so the first class, we had to write a short story in class by hand, So I wrote this story about when I was a little kid being on a roller coaster in Kennywood with my mother, and how she taught me to scream. And that kind of connects with the whole other abusive thing, which I won't tell you about now. But anyway, that's the story I wrote. And afterwards, she wrote on my paper, is this really what you want to write about? As if it was, Jennifer's pretty strong. She says it like it is. And I said, I don't know, I guess. So at the end of this class, she was talking about her book and how popular it was, and talking about her background. And she's pretty dramatic, and she was going on about being an adoptee and what her story was, and having, she said, can you imagine being a mother of a newborn and having your baby ripped from your arms? Can you imagine what that does to you? So she was going on about this. And while she was talking, I felt my throat get tighter and tighter, and my chest get tight. And my heart was beating fast. And everybody, the class was over, everybody left. And well, I waited till they left. And I said to her, I need to talk to you. So there was still somebody left in the room. So we went across the hall to a room by ourselves. She closed the door, or I closed the door, and she sat down, and I just burst into tears. And remember, I don't like to cry, and I don't like to cry in front of people. So it was a pretty powerful thing that needed to come out. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. Were you adopted? And I couldn't talk, and I shook my head. And she said, oh, did you adopt a child? And I shook my head. And then she sat back and she said, oh, Cathryn, did you give up a baby? And then I was crying, and she said, Cathryn, this is what you have to write about. This is what's in you. You write this story. And I was like, I still had the shame. I was still like, I didn't talk about it except to my therapist. There's no way I'm writing this. And she insisted. She said, you must. This is where your heart is. This is where your pain is. This is what you must write. And so for the next 5 years, I did. I wrote about it, and in this writing group, I would bring pieces in, and every 2 weeks we would read. I would read my stuff, and people would critique. And eventually somebody said, you're going to have a book here. And I said, I'm not going to have a book. I'm a nurse. I'm not a writer. And everybody thought the story was something people would want to read. I said, nobody's going to care about this. You know, this stuff happened. So what? People are going to say, so what? Which, by the way, is what publishers said. So what? It's happened. It's been published. The story's been told. So I queried 60 agents before I gave up. Then I started sending to small presses. And eventually I got a contract with the hybrid press, which means you have to pay something up front instead of them paying you. And it wasn't a lot. I mean, there are vanity presses that will publish anything and you pay them a lot. But yeah, so that's my story. And it wasn't until I went to Cub and started coming to this group and talking about it and hearing others about it that I began to understand the adoptee side. So when I was invited to Cub from Portland to Tampa, as you might imagine, is a long trip and it's pretty expensive. And I certainly wasn't going to sell enough books to make that worthwhile. And my sister lives in Pennsylvania and she kept saying, don't go there, come here instead. And somebody else said, what do you think you're going to get out of it? And I just felt like I needed to go because I needed to know more about it. And I'm really glad I did. I learned a lot.
And at the end of the day, we all have to make an investment in our own healing. And that's part of it too.
Absolutely.
You can put a price on that.
Right.
So, well, we appreciate you sharing your story, and we're going to go ahead at this time and end the recording so we can open it up to our audience to ask questions.